right. Okay. Welcome, everybody, to the fourth lecture of our DSM series, lecture series on ocean humanities. Today, we will have a talk by Kimberly Peters and Rachel Squire. And I just give you a short introduction of them before we will listen to their talk on the ocean as simulacra, the place of aquariums in staging ocean crisis. So starting with Kimberly Peters, she's a human geographer whose work explores the geographies of the seas and oceans with a particular focus on how power operates in the marine environment and how governance works and fails regarding this. She's also interested in the ways in which the seas and oceans offers geographers and other social and political scientists an alternative way for thinking about time, space, territory, and movement. And that means she's dealing with the shifting from static modes of knowing and understanding the world to more flexible, marine-inspired modes of knowing. Her publications cover a broad range of topics, and apart from her monograph, I think it was a PhD thesis, right, on pirate radio stations, Kimberly? Yeah. You had a variety of co-editorships. I just want to raise here The Mobility of Ships, published in 2015. Living with the Seas, Knowledge, Awareness, and Action from 2018, and Territory Beyond Terra from 2018, and not least last year's editorship of, or co-editorship of the Routledge Handbook of Ocean Space, which I think is not yet part of the DSM library, but will be. We have ordered it for next year. And I'm very happy that you asked me if it is possible to do this talk together with Rachel Squire. And of course, I agree to that. Rachel is a senior lecturer in human geography. So you're coming from the same field, working at Royal Holloway University of London. Rachel's research interests center upon the critical geopolitics of undersea spaces, with a specific focus on the US Navy's Cold War undersea living projects known as SEALAB 1, 2, and 3. So your research topic is about outer space, outer space under the ocean, or extraterrestrial space under the ocean, and also with this well-known connection to the universe, or to space. Through these case studies, her work explores the function of concepts like territory and terrain beyond terra. So there's also a similarity between your research focus, the interplay between the human body and extreme environments, and the role of the non-human in characterizing territorial volumes. So the aspect, or the concept of volume is what you're quite interested in. Some publications, there's a monograph on undersea geopolitics, SEALAB Science and the Cold War from 2021. And I will just refer to two co-authorships here, or one co-authorship and one article, I think it is. Co-editorship, The Final Frontier, question mark, The Enclosure of a Commons of Outer Space from 2021. It's a special issue of Society and Space Forums of the journal. And the article, Do You Dive? Question mark, Methodological Considerations for Engaging with Volume in Geography Compass. Yeah, Rachel and Kim, I'm very happy to have you here. And yeah, I give you the stage. Please show us your aquariums.
Thank you very much. And we'll just say thank you very much for the very warm and very generous introduction. So we won't say anything more about ourselves, but just thank you very much for having us here. And we're really excited to be presenting our work from a British Academy funded project today. The project itself is called Behind the Glass, Curating Aquarium Encounters in a Time of Environmental Crisis. This is a project on which Rachel is the principal investigator. The grant runs out of Royal Holloway. And we're currently, no pun intended, deep into our field work at the moment. So what we're presenting today is a work in progress. It's really our first go at curating, if you like, and we're going to be talking a lot about curation today, some of the ideas that have come out of this project, as well as introducing you a little bit to the project itself. So we'll get going, and hopefully my screen will work. There we go. Okay, so the majority of Earth's surface consists of seas and oceans, not a surprise to many people in this room. Yet this 70% is often out of sight and mind in the Western imagination, as multiple literatures repeatedly stress to us. Ocean worlds are apart, they're distant, they're outlaw spaces, they're dangerous, they're also sometimes pitched as forgotten spaces. Yet this often cited 70% of the Earth's surface is water, is increased when we take into account ocean depths. The 70% refers to an area, that blue that's depicted on the map, yet below the surface, another representation of the ocean world emerges, one of wonder and awe, of mystery and myth, of intrigue, of possibility. It's also one to be conquered as much as the surface is to be controlled. Now, these ocean worlds at surface and at depth are essential to life on Earth. So as the 2021 Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC report, many people here will be familiar with that, it notes that there are multiple simultaneous crises or stressors that are facing our worlds and ocean worlds, not least beneath the waves, threatening marine ecosystems, wider planetary systems, including our own life worlds that are reliant on ocean health. So it's now widely said that the oceans are facing these environmental crises through anthropogenic or human pressures, okay, that include everything from pollution, habitat destruction, climate change, ocean warming, hypoxia, acidification, and the list goes on. And the policy domain is fast targeting the crisis of the seas through things such as the UN Ocean Decade, or indeed the Sustainable Development Goals, including life below the water. I'll pass over to Rachel briefly.
Yes, now these threats have been made visible in various ways, and kind of vision and I guess understanding the spectacle is something that's really key to the project. In the UK, especially Blue Planet, and certainly with a lot of the people that we've spoken to in aquariums, Blue Planet was kind of a pivotal moment in kind of visualizing oceans, and again, certainly in the UK context, for aquariums was a very important kind of touch point for them, or through which they could kind of narrate some of their work. And this is building on long histories of kind of visual cultures surrounding the oceans, from the likes of Jacques Cousteau in the Cold War. He brought the ocean in colour to people for the first time. But we also need to be critical of this, and we're aware of that in the project. Obviously, representation is always loaded in certain ways. Responsibility for the crises that Kim has mentioned are attributed in particular ways, and all of this is a very kind of political process. So we don't discount that, but we do kind of think in the project that visions are really powerful. The aquarium is one under-examined frame through which we seek to kind of explore that question in the project. And whilst we are looking at kind of contemporary sites around the UK, this is not a new phenomenon. Before the power of photography, television, and even VR, the public have historically been able to access the ocean through the glass and through the medium of the aquarium. So in this paper and presentation, we're drawing on visits to aquariums we've made across multiple sites in the UK, from all the glamorous locations. We've been to Hull, Birmingham, London, Weymouth, Plymouth. Sure, there's a couple that I've forgotten there. Lots of interviews with accuracy, ocean advocacy experts who are working in these spaces alongside people who are kind of operating these spaces on a day-to-day basis. And all of this really is to try and understand how oceans are staged, how they're presented to publics, how crisis is communicated or not communicated in some of these spaces, and yeah, how the aquarium kind of functions as a touch point for people to experience the ocean in particular ways. So I'll hand back to Kim.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. So in this paper, we're going to try something out, I suppose, which is to draw from a couple of academic ideas for trying to understand these ocean visualities that are created through or curated through the aquarium. So we're going to draw from Baudrillard's notion of simulacra. So that's the idea of recreation or replication or mirroring. So in this case, a mirroring of the ocean. And also we're going to draw from Dean MacCannell's notion of staging. So the idea that tourist sites present a staged version of reality. And we're going to use those two concepts to examine how aquariums present the ocean, unpacking their social, political and environmental constructions. We're also going to pay particular attention to ocean worlds and consider how they make visible a backstage of the aquarium. So drawing a bit more on MacCannell's work there in the making of what is effectively an artificial ocean. So we're going to be thinking a little bit about how a particular narrative of the ocean is conveyed and what that actually means and how that communicates certain types of environmental messaging. And we're doing this ultimately, and where the grant proposal also began was to sort of pose this question as to what's the role and potential of aquariums in fostering more sustainable or equitable ocean futures. So to build the presentation to follow, we're going to effectively do four things, or try to do four things. First of all, we're going to start by telling you actually just a little bit more about aquariums and the history of aquariums to sort of contextualize our talk a little bit more, and also because we think this is really interesting, and we think this is part of obviously, and hopefully this fits well with this series in thinking about sort of cultures of ocean worlds. We're then going to introduce the space of the contemporary aquarium, so we're going to move from the historic to the contemporary. And then we'll move to the bulk of what I've just mentioned to actually present some of our findings for the first time, which is quite exciting for us, I think we can say, and think about the visualities that are produced through this idea of replication, recreation, recreation, mirroring and staging. And then we will finish by pointing towards some tentative conclusions. So I'm going to pass back to Rachel now. We're going to be shifting back and forth to keep you on your toes this afternoon. Rachel, over to you.
Okay, so just to provide some context to the project, I guess, because one of the first things we did before thinking about aquariums was think about the histories and where they've come from. And they have a very long history that continues to shape their kind of social, cultural and political complexities and manifestations of the aquarium today. And in the UK, at least, aquariums really kind of came into their own in the 1800s during what was known as the aquarium craze in Victorian Britain from the 1850s to the 1860s. At the forefront of this process was Philip Henry Goss, who helped to establish the London Zoological Society's fish house and who coined the word aquarium in 1853. He also wrote the first manual, a handbook to the marine aquarium in 1855. Now, Goss was a principal figure in popularising aquatic environments across domestic, public and scientific spheres. And for middle and upper class families in the Victorian era, the aquarium brought the depths of the sea and its inhabitants into everyday contexts, often for the first time, and it'll be the first time that people were seeing these contexts. And wealthy individuals were able to marvel, in the words of Granata, at the intricate design of the invisible world. In public spaces such as the Fish House in Regent's Park, Victorians were able to experience something of another environment and of a world largely unknown and unseen. These exhibitions sought in their kind of making and engineering to provide some sort of replica of the ocean, immersing audiences in aquatic worlds while simultaneously educating and entertaining the public about marine life and these kind of worlds beneath the sea. However, as Senior highlights, the public aquarium was very much situated within the wider colonial politics of the time, with Goss's work heavily dependent on African and Caribbean naturalists and collectors. As such, the aquarium was also part of wider cultures around the racial and imperial underpinnings of Victorian natural science knowledge. For Feldman, the aquarium was a reenactment of empire through the mastery of, in his words, or their words, sorry, exotic flora and fauna. Yet simultaneously, at a time when interest in and knowledge of the sea was increasing at unprecedented speed, the aquarium was seen as something that offered a reassuring sense of control. The seas had previously been imagined as monster-ridden, early maps kind of depicting sea monsters of all different kinds, kind of inhabiting spaces between land. These were kind of transformed by the tank. The tank sought to represent a space of peace, of tranquility, a world in miniature that could be contained, studied, curated, and ultimately controlled as well. As Hamlin highlights, this had wider connotations. While the aquarium might represent a world in miniature, it was, in their words, to be a civilized world. It was a space of morality, a world where order ruled chaos, and where the depths of the sea can be mastered, arranged, and selectively utilized. So there'd be no kind of bloodshed within the space of the tank. These were harmonious, predator-free spaces. This wasn't a mirror as such of the ocean, even though it was very much presented as being this kind of glimpse into the undersea environment. Rather, as Hayward would write, the aquarium was presented as a stage, an unspoilt garden in nature, a hearth for learning human self from animal other. At their worst, Hayward continues, aquariums represented a sanitary zone, working as a generative and formative force in the purification of Western civilization. Now, it's this staging that we focus on in the presentation, but with the view to thinking about the contemporary aquarium. How, when the oceans are so imperiled, do aquariums do their work? And what visions and visualities of oceans are produced? Why and to what end? In the Victorian aquarium, tanks functioned as galleries of moving images, carefully curated to reveal the fascinating behaviours of sea life. As will be explored in the coming minutes in relation to contemporary contexts, the curatorial practices involved today may also be important to how publics come to know and understand the life within the waters. Encased waters play on different modes of vision and visual models, encasing different kinds of inhabitants in different kinds of glass structures to make underwater life proximate to visitors. Although, as one interviewee mentioned last week, when she's working with children, often they see the aquarium for the first time and assume it's a TV screen or a screen of some kind. So all sorts of complex visualities at play. These fish tanks, past and present, cater to and boost interest in the oceans and drive a demand to experience the deep in a way that is fun, enjoyable, intriguing, a sense of awe and wonder implicit in that process. Yet beyond this sense of awe and imagination, natural histories are also part of the aquarium, past and present, and the idea that scientific knowledge can be gained through the observation of marine life via the aquarium or the space of the aquarium. Indeed, for Goss, aquariums were an invaluable instrument for learning about marine environments, and we're interested in exploring those complexities. Do they still function in similar ways? How do particularly corporate aquariums kind of balance this need to entertain versus the need to educate and tackle some of the most pressing issues facing our planet? As such, we kind of understand aquariums as heavily curated and engineered spaces where entertainment, amusement, science, and learning intersect, underpinned by certain modes of power and political imperatives, and also commercial imperatives as well. These are sensibilities that are very much run through contemporary aquarium spaces and are particularly important to engage with in a time of crisis, as we will now explore. So to move on to the contemporary aquarium, aquariums today continue to enable publics to kind of dive into worlds or experience worlds that are largely off limits, inaccessible, and difficult to penetrate beyond the surface. Large tanks enable sometimes enchanted, awestruck observers to see sharks, rays, turtles, and other marine life, often surrounded by colour, swimming through very clear blue bodies of water, perhaps with a relaxing soundtrack in the background. Smaller tanks might offer glimpses into coral reef systems, spotlight tiny seahorses, Nemo, clownfish, as we often heard children exclaiming with great delight at various aquariums, or as Hayward explores, provide almost kind of mystical displays of jellyfish being kind of lit up in dark tanks. Now, these interactions are important for many particular inner city environments, which forms quite a few of the aquariums that we went to see. And for those that don't live in close proximity to the sea, the aquarium might be one of the few touch points in these environments beyond television and film. And certainly with educational visits and school visits is something that children encounter from a very young age, making these kind of ocean touch points very significant. It's surprising, however, that there's not a huge amount of kind of scholarly attention on the aquarium. There's some notable exceptions to this, Bear and Braverman's work being two of those, and there is some interesting literature on zoos, and the two often kind of get lumped together without kind of distinguishing between them in particularly helpful ways. And whilst recent years have witnessed a kind of oceanic turn within geography and the wider social sciences and humanities, this work has focused on the seas and oceans themselves and kind of direct engagements with them. Academic attention has drawn attention to understanding the ocean as a place and space of social, cultural, political, economic and environmental processes and human connections. Yet aquariums, which bring people into contact with ocean life and environments kind of remotely, have largely remained beyond scrutiny. And where they have attracted attention, this has often been in work exploring the health benefits of human-fish interactions, including the potential uses of small aquariums in dementia treatment. Elsewhere, aquariums have been studied in conjunction with zoos, as I mentioned earlier, and museums as sites of public education, rather than being specific and quite unique entities in and of themselves. With a turn towards the marine social sciences focus firmly on relations between people and the sea, and with calls in the recent ocean decade aimed towards improving ocean literacy among varied populations worldwide, we contend that further academic attention should be paid to these overlooked spaces that are present in countries all over the world. The International Union for Conservation of Nature stated in 2021 that over 700 million people visit zoos and aquariums, and as such, they must be part of the response, in their words, to global crises and a key part of environmental education. However, as we've kind of mentioned, the spaces that these visitors encounter are heavily curated. Sea life is ordered both through the species that are selected to be in the tank in the first place, but also through pumps, lighting, filters, overflow screens, all of these technologies that bring this space literally to life. Such curation and visitor encounters with these dynamics, we argue, warrant further attention to understand the important, complex, and at times contradictory roles of aquariums in communicating ocean science and ecologies in a time of crisis. So this paper seeks to make a case for putting aquariums firmly on the academic agenda, with a view that understanding the role of aquariums, fish tanks on public display could offer possibilities for better understanding how to engage and enrol everyday people in planetary stewardship, and to understand how people come to understand the oceans. Indeed, Hayward argues that aquariums can function as sites of ecological hope, whereby the aquarium visitor is entertained into caring about environmental ethics and marine biology. They thus hold great potential as spaces of public engagement in ocean health and climate change issues. And again, a few studies have really engaged with this. And as we've already talked about, this kind of staging, how the ocean is represented, manufactured, I guess, in certain ways, is something that we're keen to explore. So our research into this, before I just hand back over to Kim, began around 4 to 5 years ago when we went on a very cold visit to Kew Gardens in London, and we're looking at the tanks on display in one of the greenhouses. I apologise for a very dorky picture of me there outside of the London Aquarium. And yeah, our kind of thoughts mulling over aquarium spaces culminated in the grant application in 2021, and it runs through to 2024. So as Kim said, we're just kind of coming to the end, I guess, of the kind of fieldwork stage and thinking about next steps. To understand the work of aquariums, we've kind of adopted a multi-method, predominantly qualitative approach, considering representations of aquariums on promotional materials, online spaces, but also how aquariums are curated through in-depth interviews, site visits, being shown around these spaces in various different ways, and understanding how these spaces are encountered through our own experiences as well. We turn to some of these materials next to think about the staging and the ocean as kind of simulacra within aquarium spaces. So I'll hand back to Kim now.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Rachel. And an invitation also to Rachel to chip into the next section. If you have interesting things also to add there, we've shared this paper back and forth, but Rachel also may well have additional things to add from the most recent interviews that have been done. So now we want to turn to this point about how the aquarium is actually staged. So whilst the popularity and general excitement about aquariums may have waxed and waned since that Victorian aquarium craze that Rachel spoke of, they still actually attract significant attention. So the Sea Life Centre, the Sea Life Aquarium in London, for example, and Rachel was just on the picture there outside the London Aquarium, for example, hosts over 1 million visitors a year. So that's a lot of people, with school trips and educational visits forming a key component of this. And actually, something that I've noticed throughout this presentation is we've actually mentioned kids, schools, education quite a lot. And I think that is really a theme that has arisen quite a lot in this research. Moreover, many aquariums like Hull, exotic Hull that we've been to, offer a range of immersive experiences, including sleepovers and wedding ceremonies, which are designed to bring visitors into deep marine technoscience worlds. But wherever the location may be of the aquariums, and we've been talking about where our research will go next in terms of thinking about European aquariums as well, they offer a very particular view, as we've mentioned, of ocean worlds that have been constructed, created and curated for public consumption. They are then, we think, the ocean staged, to borrow one of the words from the quote earlier. So this has kind of brought us a little bit, if you like, to the work of MacCannell, as I mentioned. His classic text from 1973 that's been updated many times and used many times since then. His text, Staged Authenticity, draws from Irving Goffman's notion of front and back spaces to propose that tourist sites have a front and a back stage. The front stage is one that tourist producers have created for consumption, the space that is most readily accessible to visitors. It's the site or setting that tourist companies or organisations, the ones that they want tourists to encounter, they're often the vision of perfection, if you like. They will also be the sites and spaces that tourists themselves may expect from repeated images that they've consumed of tourism, a particular notion of what a place is supposed to be like. So we know what an aquarium is supposed to be like. And so when we go to an aquarium, we expect it to look like that. We expect to encounter that vision. So there is also, however, though, a backstage. And this is where the front stage is produced. But it's here that is argued, or at least in MacCannell's original text, where the authenticity is supposed to lie. Yet to make matters more complex, MacCannell notes two important points about the backstage and the front stage. He says that most of all, tourists actually know that when they encounter the front stage, what they're getting is not the real deal. So people know when they go to the aquarium that they're not getting the ocean. They know they're getting an aquarium, if you like. Now, some tourists will either enjoy the experience for what it is, it doesn't really matter, we know we're going to an aquarium, or they will delight in the inauthentic. They know what they're getting is not real. And also they enjoy it furthermore because, as MacCannell notes, they've not been duped into believing that they're getting something that is authentic. Moreover, MacCannell also notes that the backstage is not necessarily any more authentic. So we assume that the backstage produces a front stage. So if we can see the backstage, we can see a place or a setting for what it really is. But he kind of says, well, sometimes it's not also any more authentic. It may also too be staged. So as MacCannell writes, and I quote him here, the backstage is the space for outsiders who are permitted to view the details of the inner operation for commercial, domestic or industrial public institutions. Now, the aquariums that we visited all had several front and back stages, which we'd like to talk about. Now, oftentimes and in many cases, the front stage was a clearly very produced and curated space for encounters with underwater or deep worlds, an artificial ocean recreated in a tank. They were often thematically staged to represent different kinds of oceans, from tropical to polar seas to, as Rachel mentioned, deep sea jelly worlds. And they often used particular iconography to represent these different ocean worlds. So polar areas were often very white in the use of the color, and then the tropical areas uses of kind of deep orange, you know, associated again with Nemo fish. So using iconography that is familiar to people, signage and symbolism that comes to represent our expectations of ocean worlds. They also used a variety of staging props, mirroring those symbols typically associated with ocean. So you see some of our pictures here, boats, paddles, netting, some of those things that you would associate necessarily with the ocean. The color palette of almost all aquarium spaces we worked in was blue, the archetypal color that comes to represent the ocean. Although anyone who stood by the North Sea will see it's more murky and brown. The aquariums we used often used height and depth to really curate the ocean. Many aquariums you'd go in and they'd route you downwards as though you're going into the deep. Others would take you up before routing you down. So on first glance then, aquariums are worlds that in some ways might seem to replicate some of the undersea environment. So using that iconography we may well expect, providing that view, as Rachel mentioned, into the minute ecosystems of coral reefs or other ocean worlds that might remain otherwise unseen. On a second glance, or when we look a little bit closer, however, we can appreciate they are designed. They are intended to communicate particular messages, to connect diverse publics to the sea, where direct access may not be a usual part of everyday life. They rely on, to use Baudrillard's kind of usage of kind of simulacra here, they rely on symbols and signs and stereotypes, creating that front stage. Expectations of ocean worlds that may not be real, but through symbolism come to depict a mode of reality. So they become a really important contact point of encounter and immersion, and they have the capacity to shape how people come to understand the seas and oceans, its health, conservation, and indeed climate change. And this may have, in turn, significant implications for how the crisis affecting our planet is understood, mitigated, and responded to. Now, one thing that we did take quite a lot of time looking at was environmental messaging within aquariums. One interesting thing that I think is really worth mentioning is whether an aquarium was commercial, so run for profit, or charitable. There are different formats of aquariums that exist. I think we were both very moved oftentimes, I would say, by the care that goes into these working environments. You know, everyone kind of said, you know, we are dealing with species in captivity, and that's a tricky topic to begin with. And I think the levels of the care was a real, I wouldn't say surprise to us, but something that was evident again and again. But in terms of environmental messaging, it often appeared it wasn't necessarily upfront in that staging. It was often sometimes hidden along your journey or your route, or it was at the end, or it's certainly not something that is pushed necessarily strongly within some aquariums, although not all. And this, of course, is because some aquariums, or indeed most aquariums, will be reliant on visitor footfall for their income, and they're always towing a line between being a tourist attraction and an education facilitator. So in both of our cases, tourist attraction or educational facilitator, we found that care and stewardship is built through a staging of wonder and enchantment in the aquarium. So visual spectacles and immersive encounters are designed to create majestic seascapes, effectively. Aquariums, in short, can't be in the business of presenting the ocean as it is, right? Because aquariums are neither mirrors of the world, and nor is it an appealing aesthetic ultimately for visitors to present a degraded sea, nor would it be ethical for aquariums to replicate a sea that is in crisis, right? That would actually be something unethical for an aquarium to do in the business of obviously ensuring animal health and the health of the aquarium in general. So it's not going to be an appealing aesthetic for visitors to show an ocean in crisis. So how they deal with that environmental messaging is really interesting. And as one interviewee told us, and this is a paraphrase of the interview that we did with them, they said people are not coming here to basically to hear the situation is terrible. So rather, if we show them the ocean, show them the wonder, get them to love it, then we can develop a level of care for it. So in terms of staging then, the front stage presents often, and again to echo what Rachel was saying, a pristine ocean, free of predator relations, colourful and colour-filled, clean, smooth. Visitors are aware they're visiting an aquarium, a staged ocean, rather than the ocean itself. And many aquariums seek to deepen the experience through uses of tech, as we've mentioned, VR, virtual reality, and video gaming to engage visitors with the seas. And in this case, this creates a literal virtual ocean. So here the ocean is doubly removed. A further form of simulacra is produced as the ocean is not only replicated physically in the tank, but also virtually on screen. So this is a big part of aquariums now, is those modes of engagement with the sea is not just through the tank in the aquarium, but also through the use of virtual reality, also through the use of gaming and those other immersive virtual techniques. So here we see that visitors delight in the inauthentic of the front stage. And this also, in some ways, perhaps, and this will be further analysis for us to do, may limit any environmental messaging further, where visions of the ocean produced jar with the realities of the ocean out there as they're actually depicted in the IPCC report and in others. So as Feldman notes in their work, environmental situations and non-human ecologies are sometimes oversimplified, and troubling external factors are removed from the public aquarium. But that doesn't mean the aquarium can't do some of its work. Aquariums sometimes present environmental awareness in contradictory ways, where the spectacle of seeing life behind the glass has been predicated on that environmental mastery that Rachel mentioned. Now, because of this tension in the front stage, visitors, we know we're not getting the ocean, we know it's kind of staged, but we like the fact it's staged, all this complexity. Maybe this is why so many visitors are seeking out the backstage, which indeed they are. We were quite surprised by this. And backstaging was actually, for me, I have to say, I was fascinated by this. I was probably, unfortunately, I did put Rachel on the previous slide. I'm sorry, Rachel. I should have put a very geeky picture of me on the backstage. I absolutely, I was one of the people who was fascinated by the backstage. Aquariums use loads of different techniques to engage visitors with the backstage. This is not the ocean itself, but is the inner technological workings of the aquarium: the pumps, the pipes, the tanks, the filters, the siphons, the valves, all of the stuff that keeps the front stage working, the front stage in action. Now, we asked aquarists and curators at aquariums what the draw was for why present the backstage to visitors. Surely the point is, going back to the Victorian craze, that we present the ocean in a tank. And they kind of said they were really surprised too, but people have a real fascination, quote, with how the aquarium works. And these aquarists also noted they were blown away by the interest that people had in the backstage. In a most recent interview we did, someone also suggested that it was all part of the aquarium's educational mission to be both about science, but also about engineering. So those kind of what we call those STEM subjects. So the aquarium offers both things, not just about life, but also about tech. So in our work, we experience three ways in which vision and visuality is produced or curated through the backstage. And I want to talk about those three backstages with you, if I may. So we had lots of different backstage experiences. The first one was through a tour. And these were tours that were specifically sold to visitors. So these were highly curated encounters with the backstage. So Dean MacCannell's idea that the backstage is never actually authentic, it's actually something that may be designed. Now, the one we went on was, I mean, I don't want to say too much, Rachel, but I think we both came out of it and we were, I think we were fractionally disappointed. And we weren't actually wholly convinced it was a proper backstage. Would that be fair to say, Rachel? I think that's fair to say. So basically, this was a commercial tour that was sold to visitors. It was heavily curated. It showed rather more convenient spaces that were behind the scenes, behind a door that may or may not have actually been behind the scenes. It was unusually tidy. in there, and it had an emphasis more on animal care, so on feeding and health rather than infrastructure and piping. So here the Backstage was only accessible through further payment, and it appeared therefore as some kind of special offering to visitors of the aquarium, sealed off space to give them something that was extra, if you will. And there's some pictures here of this kind of curated Backstage, where you see the sort of the names of the species. So, you know, Flo, who's a nurse shark, and what they've been fed on that particular day and how much. Now, the second engagement that we had with the Backstage was through a curatorial device where the aquarium lacked the resource to offer behind the scenes tours. So instead, they didn't have the staffing to do that. So instead what they did is they just started to remove bits of the aquarium. They started to remove fire doors and other coverings to actually show the pipework behind the scenes. So this is actually what you can see in one of the aquariums that we visited. Okay, so here the front and the Backstage kind of coalesce, with the everyday visitor confronted with the reality of the aquarium as a constructed oceanic space, because everywhere they go, they're seeing the Backstage. They're seeing that this isn't the ocean and this mirror of the ocean. They're seeing that this is produced via these kind of tanks and pipes. Careful signage informs the visitors that what they're looking at and how this Backstage supports the front stage. And here the visitors delight in this idea of then seeing this glimpse they get to how the aquarium is constructed. The final Backstage that we encountered, I think I might have got all my slides. The final Backstage, sorry, I've got my slides the wrong way around. I should admit that I've done this. This was a curated Backstage. This is behind, these were the removed panels in one of the aquariums. And this one was actually the final aquarium which we visited. Now, the final engagement with the Backstage was a special tour that was given to us as researchers, and hence inaccessible to ordinary visitors, highlighted by the fact we had to go in a very ominous looking back door into this aquarium space as well. Here we saw the unadulterated aquarium, the mess, the trip hazards, the quarantined animals. We smelled the food, heard the piping, the gurgling, the churning. We saw people hard at work in acts of care, ensuring healthy animals, good water quality, and basic health and safety was maintained. Our Backstage experience was a one-off, but it was revealing of the functioning of the front stage of the aquarium. So what are front and back stages, and what, I guess, the ideas that we're potentially playing with here is what our front and backstage experiences showed us was the complexity of relations between the spaces of the aquarium, the tank and the spaces that keep those tanks functioning, and the ocean at large. So whilst the backstage was never going to be revealing of a true ocean, the front stage being the kind of mirror of the ocean, the backstage not being the ocean itself, but this kind of infrastructural space. Oddly, the backstage was revealing of an oceanic replication that the aquarium kind of embodies. What do I mean by that? The backstage oddly presented a reality of some ocean worlds out there as complex, highly managed, industrialized, technified spaces where life is subject to near constant maintenance, management, order, and control. So actually, is the backstage any different to the ocean out there? There is this kind of highly curated and managed space increasingly, and we see that through a number of projects that are looking at modes of management of the marine world. So are these backstages really any different from the oceans that are controlled through conservation, exploited with tech, managed through dredgers, spatial plans, and other mechanisms? Together, then, we see that the front and back stages do work of informing visitors about the oceans in a multiplicity of ways. Of course, many visitors just simply go to delight in the front stage, to sit in front of that TV screen that is the tank. And this may be what is necessary to build ocean education and citizenship. For others, the backstage may fulfill curious engineering minds, or may send a message that the oceans are never devoid of human interventions. But as our research shows, aquariums are not mirrors of the ocean, and whilst they bring audiences into touch, they don't do so innocently. Curated front and back, and how that happens, is really crucial to the messages that they convey. I'll pass back to Rachel.
Just to offer some conclusions, I guess the point of the project isn't really about kind of thinking about how real or not aquariums are, because I think everyone involved would say they're not real oceans. They are very curated entities. But what we do want to explore is how these representations of the ocean perform and kind of do particular work in presenting ocean worlds, and how these spaces are experienced both as tourist sites, but as Kim was saying, that kind of sense of awe and wonder. Do they kind of prompt this ocean literacy that the UN Ocean Decade is seeking to kind of bring about in the general publics? And part of that, as we've explored, is thinking about the kind of front stage, backstage, and how both parts reveal different kind of aspects of the ocean and also conceal things as well. This is never a simple kind of one-way process, and there's lots more that I think we could say about how certain species are championed at the expense of others, and the types of representations that go on there. But these stages, we argue, play different roles in thinking about oceans at a very important time in kind of ocean health. Whilst few aquariums display degraded oceans, sometimes you find like the odd tank with plastic bags floating around in, but that's pretty much it. Few aquariums also reveal the kind of stark realities of ocean worlds and the threats that they face. But these front and backstage worlds present a kind of ocean of wonder, and even with the kind of technological pipework engineering, it's still pretty kind of awe-inspiring to look at and to consider the kind of work that goes into it, or at least Kim and I found it to be so. Yet we also found that there's kind of subtle messaging in both of these types of spaces, where people can pick up on various different meanings, interpretations, both explicit and perhaps more understated, and learning both about the kind of soft impact, as Kim was saying, of building ocean citizenship through enchantment, spectacle, fear, as you kind of hear children screaming with the sharks and things, but also to those backstage experiences of feeding, animal care, and understanding how you do care and look after animals within this context. And certainly, just to go back to that point about vision, one of the aquariums we visited and are working with is the National Marine Aquarium in Plymouth, and they've recently every Tuesday you can tune in, or not, as is the case I understand in Germany, to the BBC to see a programme called Secrets of the Aquarium, which is really all about foregrounding many of the themes that we've been discussing, and really, I guess, showcasing the behind the scenes work that goes on there. So yeah, I'll hand back over to Kim to wrap things up.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. And I should just say, I mean, it's just a complete pleasure working with Rachel on this project, because it's so fascinating, and we learned there's so much more we could say about schools, education, lighting, sound, tech, pumps, filters, but we have definitely found that we've developed a love of piping, and that has been probably one of my highlights. So to bring things, as Rachel mentioned, to a close, in Baudrillard's Simulacra and Simulation, he raises an important point about the presence of simulation, that there isn't a simple reality, that we live through modes of simulation, of perceived realities. As he writes here in this quote, Disneyland is presented as imaginary in order to make us believe that the rest is real, whereas all of Los Angeles in America that surrounds it are no longer really real, but belong to the hyperreal order, or to the order of simulation. It's no longer a question of false representation of reality or ideology, but of concealing the fact that the real is no longer real. So Baudrillard kind of, I guess, pushes us a little bit to think about notions of reality. Now, as Rachel mentioned, that's not the purpose. We're not here to say, is the ocean real or not, but rather to think about these different modes of engagement, these different modes of mirroring and staging and replication that work through aquarium worlds. So aquariums and oceans may well be thought of as simulacra. They're not intrinsically real spaces, but they're produced through modes of symbolism and modes of meaning. What matters, however, and also to us, is that there is a real ocean out there, spiraling into, many would say, depths of decline. And thinking about perceived realities of the ocean rendered through the aquarium might help us think about how aquariums produce visualities, experiences, and understandings of the sea. And these interventions will serve to enrich ocean knowledge, experience, and communication, and will help us to understand what place, or what is the potential place of the aquarium in fostering more sustainable and equitable futures. So thank you for allowing us to share our research for the first time. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kim and Rachel, for this great tour through and out of popular aquariums, and for the intriguing connections that you presented us to Baudrillard and the hyperreality simulacra principles or concepts, and to MacCannell's work on the backstage and front stage, and this question of the remains of reality that we might or might not have in our world, media or mediated worlds that we're living in. I just briefly will stop the recording, and then we can enter into the discussion.